Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Jonathan Chisholm, Lamont Johnson, Reverend Jerry Wright, and Reverend Jeremiah Wright Jr. Jonathan and Lamont were editors, and Jerry was a contributor to the new book, Black Prophetic Patriotism, Reverend Jeremiah Wright Jr.'s Message, Ministry, and Legacy, which is published by Bloomsbury Academic. Dr. Jonathan L. Chisholm is an associate professor of history and associate director of the Center for Social Inquiry and Transformation at the University of Houston, downtown. He received a PhD from Rice University and an MDiv from Southern Methodist University. He's published multiple books and articles examining religious activism, social justice for marginalized communities. He's the author and editor of 5 books. Dr. Chisholm also founded and served as the director of the Path to Freedom at St. John's downtown, a ministry to prisoners, returning citizens, and their families from 2008 to 2014. In 2021, he co-founded and became the inaugural president of the Autism Dads Social Club, a local nonprofit organization that serves fathers and families with autistic and neurodiverse children. Reverend Dr. Lamont J. Johnson Sr. is a seasoned pastor, scholar, and theological educator, currently serving as the senior pastor of the historic West Durham Baptist Church and visiting professor of practical theology at Turner Theological Seminary. Dr. Johnson holds degrees from Virginia Union University, Shaw University, Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary, Drew University, and earned his PhD in leadership studies from North Carolina A&T State University. Licensed to preach at age 14 and ordained at 19, he's pastored congregations in North Carolina and served in numerous denominational leadership roles. Dr. Johnson is an accomplished musician, published author, and a respected mentor. Throughout his work with the Gift Collaborative, he supports sustainability, innovation, and Black theological education. Above all, he's a devoted father and servant leader committed to faith, justice, and community transformation. Dr. Jerry L. Wright is a prophetic problem solver and humanitarian dedicated to excellence in community building through faith and creative programming. With extensive experience in business development, strategic planning, nonprofit consulting, and social justice advocacy at the intersection of faith and religion. She is sought after change agent. Dr. Jerry founded the Butterfly Effect, a nonprofit organization that ministers to women and families impacted by injustice. She also founded Writing Memories, a publishing company, and authored a book called Preacher's Daughter, A Journey to the Pit in the Presence of God. She is also the National Conference Director for the Oikos Institute for Social Impact, an inductee into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers at Morehouse College. She earned a Demon and Human-Centered Design from the Interdenominational Theological Center. Dr. Jeremiah Wright Jr. is pastor emeritus of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, where he served as senior pastor for 36 years. He's a military veteran, having served 2 years in the United States Marine Corps and 4 years in the United States Navy. In the Navy, he was a cardiopulmonary technician, and he monitored 2 of President Lyndon B. Johnson's surgeries, thereby receiving 2 presidential commendations for rendering outstanding service. He's an alumnus of 2 HBCUs, Virginia Union University and Howard University. He received his undergraduate degree and first graduate degree from Howard, his second graduate degree from the University of Chicago's Divinity School, and his doctorate from United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. He's a trained historian of religions and the author of 4 books. He's married to the Reverend Dr. Rama Wright, the father of 5 children and the grandfather of 5 children. He is the co-founder of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference and is a 33rd degree Grand Inspector General of the Prince Hall Masons. As a 9-year stroke survivor with severe limitations on his speaking voice, he's assisted by his daughter, Dr. Jerry. You can learn more about all of them and the book at bloomsbury.com. So thank you all so much for joining us. It's really an honor to be here with you, and congratulations on all of your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So a special thank you to Jeremiah for being with us today. I really appreciate you making the effort to join us. So let's get right to the book. As I mentioned, the title is Black Prophetic Patriotism, Reverend Jeremiah Wright Jr.'s Message, Ministry, and Legacy. So maybe you can tell us how that book came about. Jonathan, you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Myself, Lamont, and Dr. Darius Benton, we did a conference presentation paper at the American Academy of Religion, and we received a lot of great feedback during our presentation. All of our papers centered on Reverend Jeremiah Wright, and we were looking at the events 2008 from the perspective of contemporary moments in history. And so we had a great conversation during that panel, as most academic conferences are, and we decided, man, we should extend this conversation and invite some other folks to participate. And so we began that process from that conference.
Very cool. John or Lamont, anything you want to add to that or?
Yes. So, and again, thank you for having us on. I have been a starch fan, if you will, and supporter academically and theologically and preaching homiletically of Reverend Wright, and a graduate of Virginia Union University. And a sidebar, while I was at Virginia Union University, I was a part of the concert choir. And one of my fondest memories was Reverend Wright, Dr. Wright hosting our concert choir at Trinity. I'll never forget it. And one day he was on campus and having met him, and he may not remember this, but in passing, just kind words to a student, to an undergrad student. And so when we later on had the opportunity to engage his legacy from an academic standpoint, it was no questions around the need, right, for the restoration of his name, the need for a better understanding of the right rhetoric from a homiletical standpoint, from a pastoral standpoint. And so this collaboration with this paper for the Southwest, I believe it was the Southwest region of the American Academy of Religion. And I had met Dr. Chisholm through Darius Benton, Dr. Benton. And the work spoke for itself. And as my colleague Jonathan said, the follow up pushed us to dig deeper, to explore further, to invite other academics, other voices into this conversation and to expand this, again, right rhetoric into an academic, a book. So we're excited about that.
And if I may, Brian, I want to add that the original Genesis, even before the conference presentation papers, was reading Barack Obama and Michelle Obama's memoirs, which were published right around 2019, early 2020. And once I got to the part about Reverend Wright and how they revisited that narrative and story, it just hit me in the gut. And I wanted to do something to respond and to invite some other scholars to have a deeper conversation.
Well, it seems like, one of the primary motivations for the book was to set the record straight, so to speak, because, Dr. Wright got so smeared,
Indeed.
right? During the 2008 timeframe in particular. I got to believe that had to be a strong driver for you all to do this.
Without
Absolutely.
question. Without question. And again, one of the things that I shared in a previous setting is that there are certain persons in America in different generations who, from the preaching standpoint, Black theological circles, Jeremiah Wright, his name was synonymous with preaching clarity, preaching activism, Black liberation theology, in a real sense, right? And not this rehashed academic quotes, but boots on the ground leadership. And so during that time of this, and I appreciate the term smearing, right? Really rubbing his name down because that's what it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
There was this struggle within many African American church communities and between Black scholars and Black preachers for how Dr. Wright's name was being characterized and what we know his character to be, right? Both academically, his service to our country, fighting for persons in ministry who are members of the LGBTQ AI community, his love for his family, his love for Chicago, his love for Trinity, and then to be portrayed as someone who was basically out of his mind, not knowing what he was talking about, yet had the preaching prowess enough to where the Obamas sat under his leadership and took his message and his words and used it to promote their own agenda.
And I would add that it wasn't just Reverend Wright, because I think we have the privilege with this book of coming at it from an objective standpoint.
Sure.
Because I myself, I was able to listen to Reverend Wright speak at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church here in Houston, but I don't have a personal tie or connection. And back in 2008, really didn't know Reverend Wright. I have since had the opportunity to know him. But it was the attack on Black liberation theology, right, which I learned in seminary, and seeing how that is being publicly caricatured and misunderstood, that really bothered me. And even at the highest level by folks on the political right, I mean, which we assume, yes, they're not going to get it, but even some of our folks on the political left were smearing Black liberation theology and Black church culture. And so, I mean, there's a desire to set the record straight, even more broadly speaking, because Reverend Wright is a part of a Black liberation theological tradition that we embrace, that we cherish and believe in strongly.
So I think, still to this day, there's a lot of either misunderstanding or just not knowing about, Black liberation theology, African American prophetic tradition. And I'm sure many of our listeners, like I'll say myself, don't know as much as what we should. So could you help us understand that a little bit? I know it's kind of difficult, in a brief, setting like this, but to the extent that you can, I'd love for you to help us understand.
Sure, I'll jump in first. So again, we shared earlier offline. I am a preacher's kid. My dad still pastors, and my father is a product of Prince Edward County, Virginia. Prince Edward County, Virginia is in the history books for being the county in Virginia that shut down the entire school system for 8 years when desegregation became law. And so that is how my father ended up, and his brothers ended up in New Jersey. And so I was birthed into a family, into a preaching culture where Black liberation theology, without knowing who James Combs and Iva Carruthers, right, and so many others, and early on, not knowing a Jeremiah Wright, but hearing my father and his brothers who literally lived segregation, but for all of their children to go to college or to do something with their lives, it was preaching truth to power, not from a place of desperation, but a place of hope and a place of clarity, right? For what the Holy Writ, the Bible, really says, right? And not this cherry-picked, westernized understanding of a God that sits high and looks low, as John Kennedy says, because we serve a low-down God, right? Who comes down, sits, dwells among our people. But it also has within it an aspect of lifting as we climb, right? And this gospel of Jesus Christ, but that was given to the poor, but not to keep the poor poor. Right? But it's also the antithesis and a polar opposite to prosperity gospel, prosperity teaching, which is self-promotion, right, in the name of Jesus Christ. And as we also see now, Christian nationalism, which is nationalism that is cloaked in theology and Christianity, but it really authentically is self-promotion for those who want to remain the top 10%. And so
Mhm.
Black liberation theology oftentimes is, I believe, simplified, overly simplified to the work of James Cone, right? And he's one of the most quotable theologians when it comes to Black liberation theology, and his work, God in the lynching tree, and his work around oppression. However, Black liberation theology is even broader than just the Black church, the Black diaspora, right? Because it really, really has its roots in liberation theology. And there's so much scholarship around that. And Dr. Wright, Reverend Wright, has preached on it, has expounded on it, has lectured on liberation, has lived it as a scholar practitioner. Well, I like to say a scholar practitioner, because he was a teacher and a preacher, and he taught what he preached, and he lived and he lives what he preaches. And so that is in a nutshell. I'm sure Jonathan can expound a little bit better or more than I did.
Yeah, no, I think you did well. I mean, pure and simply, God sides with the oppressed, the marginalized, the vulnerable in our society. God loves them. God wills for them to be free and liberated from that oppression. And of course, as a historian, oppression is a long part of our history. If it's the genocide, oppression of Native American, enslaved Africans, Jim Crow. I mean, where is God in this story? And God wills for freedom and justice.
And it's like folks like, Will Barber and, before him, Jesse Jackson and Martin Luther King were all focused on overcoming poverty, right? The Poor People's Campaign and, other kinds of, things similar to that. That was not limited to like just black people, right? I mean, it was poor people. I mean, it was trying to overcome oppression, period.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I was just going to contend one of the wicked machinations of America has been to use race and ethnicity, class, culture, and religion in a hierarchical sense, but by using one against the other to promote the minority, which was
Mhm.
already in the majority. And
Yeah.
so, historically, right, how Americans treated Catholics, how Americans treated Jewish people, how Americans treated African Americans, how Americans treated Polish people, Irish people, right,
Mhm.
until persons were able to quote unquote become a part of the majority culture. Um,
Mhm.
but it's always been weaponized, right? And the idea is that God is, as Dr. Jonathan said, God is on the side of the oppressed. That is the vantage point of Black liberation theology, but not so that the oppressed can become the oppressor,
Mhm. Mhm.
but that the oppressed can be co-liberators for anyone who is subjugated and is experiencing oppression.
So let's get back to the specific, instance of, Dr. Wright being picked on. Um, there's a lot of cases in politics where you see folks getting quoted out of context, right? I mean, it happens all the time. Just like same thing with the Bible, as you mentioned earlier. Why do you think this particular instance with, Reverend Wright, um, was so much more ruffle people's feathers? Kind of made a bigger deal about that than what, had been the case in, many other instances.
Well, I mean, I think this particular instance was calculated to undermine, to undercut campaign of then Senator Barack Obama.
Hmm.
I mean, many people feared what a black president might do for various reasons. And so to undercut him, let's associate him with a radical pastor.
Or someone portrayed to be a radical pastor,
Exactly. And which for me, radicalism is not a bad word. I
yeah.
mean, because there's a prophetic book by one of the premier scholars and theologians, Black religion and Black radicalism. And from my understanding, radicalism associates with getting at the roots causes of racial oppression. I mean, not just reforming America, making America better, but addressing with structural root causes of systemic oppression and seeking for transformation. And for many people, that is disturbing, that we want to keep America the same. We want to just fix it a little bit. We don't want to deal with the structural elements that perpetuate poverty and injustice. But yeah, I think this was intentional, calculated to discredit Obama's presidency. I mean, pure and simply, to associate him with Black radicalism, which throughout American history, folks from that tradition, which I think Malcolm X definitely is a part of the Black radical tradition, several leaders that are serious about justice and freedom, even Martin Luther King, post 1965, right? After he starts to speak against the war in Vietnam, after he starts to call for broader systemic changes as it relates to poverty and injustice around the world. I mean, he becomes a part of this Black prophetic and radical tradition. And so, I mean, it was clearly an intentional effort on the part of folks on the right. And what bothers me is a lot of people don't understand and don't see what was really happening at the deeper levels.
Well, one of the things that I really appreciated was in the chapter written by Michael Waters. He mentions a sermon that Dr. Martin Luther King was planning to give on the Sunday after that he was shot. So obviously he didn't, wasn't able to. But it was titled "Why America May Go to Hell," right? And so you compare, the treatment of Dr. King with the treatment of Dr. Wright, right? And it's been so drastically different.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I think it's different, but it's somewhat the same. So again, Dr. King oftentimes is sanitized. We
Yeah,
remember the King
yeah.
of 1963 standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, "I have a dream." Forgotten is the later King who protests the Vietnam War, right? Who is calling for economic justice, who's about to deliver this sermon that Reverend Michael Waters mentioned, "Why America May Go to Hell." I mean, that's the King that a lot of times we don't want to remember on MLK Day.
Yeah.
America tends to forget that King. And in fact, during those years, Martin Luther King's popularity was plummeting. I mean, he was losing allies on the left. Many of the supporters of civil rights organizations were feeling that he shouldn't speak against the war. So, I mean, the point is, I think what was happening to King mirrors what happened to Reverend Wright in
Hmm.
terms
Hmm.
of the alienation that he started to experience as his prophetic radicalism is exposed and as his heart for really dealing with systemic injustices are put on live stream.
and then to add to that, there was also not a Barack Obama opposing Martin Luther King's time, if that makes sense,
Hmm.
right? So you have Dr. King, who is this polarizing figure, and as Jonathan has already stated, during that time, I'm a lifelong Baptist, right? So Joseph Jackson, and there is this whole historical schism within the National Baptist Convention, and part of it did have to do with leadership who felt that Dr. King was going, quote unquote, too far, right?
Hmm.
But again, you have later on a voice crying out in the wilderness at Trinity and others of the same tradition, of the same liberation tradition. But again, you have all of this juxtaposed to now Barack Obama, who again was sitting in the seats he and his family at Trinity, up until the time when it was then not advantageous,
Mm.
right, for the rhetoric of not just Jeremiah Wright, but the rhetoric of any black prophetic pastoral-minded a preacher, activist, or scholar in America to then be going against our one uh, African American person that was going to be up front.
Mm-hmm,
Right.
mm-hmm.
And it looks like, I think Reverend Wright may have some words. I
Yes,
don't
sir.
know if you were trying to say something.
Martin Marty was America's leading church historian and one of my mentors.
Hmm.
When I went to dinner, my wife Rayma and I went to dinner at Martin's house during the media mix. I asked Dr. Marty, why is it that not one journalist has fact-checked the saying, "Goddamn America"? Had they done so, they would have found out that William James, a leading professor at Harvard University's Divinity School, loved and revered, said the same thing in 1903 about what the United States was doing to the Philippines.
Hmm.
Dr. Marty's response summarizes what Lamont and Jonathan have said, Brian. He said William James did not have a black senator in his congregation running for presidency. Dr. King didn't have anybody in his congregation running for presidency. Vernon Johns didn't have anybody. Adam Clayton Powell didn't have it. I was the only one with a senator, black senator running for president. That's why they didn't care what the facts were.
Right.
Just what was preached before Senator Obama was senator, and the Sunday after 9/11. Put that out there, make it look like it was like 2008, and scare votes away from Obama. King didn't have anybody in his congregation to be scared away from, nor did Vernon John, nor Adam Clayton Powell.
That's really the crux of this whole thing, isn't it? It's purely
Absolutely.
political, purely political. Somebody thought they found, a talking point that would sway voters and tried to maximize that.
Indeed.
But it didn't work anyway.
It didn't work anyway. So that all happened in 2008, and this is 2026. I mean, do you think that having that time passed has helped in terms of you're now being able to make the points that you're making?
Definitely. And I think as more time passes, it will help. But 2008, when Obama is elected, first African American ever in the long history of this country, political pundits were interpreting that some as a sign that, yes, America has finally entered the post-racial epoch that we've all been hoping for and dreaming for, that Obama represented the fulfillment of Dr. King's dream. Anthem of the civil rights movement, we shall overcome. When Obama was elected, we overcame racism and white supremacy. A new day, a new era has begun. And I think it felt like Obama himself at times when he was speaking was starting to believe some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But all along, after the civil rights movement ended, I mean, what I love about Reverend Wright and listening to his messages and rhetoric and speeches is that he was articulating the fact that white supremacy was still happening in America. He was calling it out. And so when Obama is elected, what happens? White supremacy continues to rear its ugly head with police brutality, with the need for the emergence of a Black Lives Matter. And of course, I mean, there are several instances, but ultimately for me, what tops it off is the attack on our nation's capital and the rise of Trumpism. So for me, all of this is happening during Obama's presidency and after, and it dispels the post-racial myth. And for us, it sets the stage of restoring the credibility of Black prophetic radicalism and Black prophetic patriotism, which we think Reverend Wright represents.
I think one of the benefits, now of being able to look back at the incredible racist backlash, that happened after Obama was president, right? Because I had the same hope, right? That, we were going to be past the ridiculous, long, deep history of racism in this country. But boy, was that wishful thinking. I mean, unfortunately, we've seen it, charge back in spades, with all the terrible things that have happened over the last few years.
Right.
Indeed. Indeed, and we also have one who is giving it jet fuel, in terms of the current president, and the rhetoric and his outright racist agenda, and those he has put in place. And it is very clear. It is not even secretive. It is very, very, very clear that his agenda. And so, I mean, if this new generation, right, because time has now allowed this writing, and Jeremiah Wright's name, to be talked about and promoted to a new generation. I'm 40 something something something. No, I'm 47, and so I have children who would be coming up and would not know some of the names that we're all talking about, right? Unless they're in seminary or theological education. And so Reverend Wright is then put in a place where his name was used as a political volley, um, far beyond, out of context, but far beyond the center of the Black church, of the Christian faith, Christian traditions. And so imagine now this sermon that Michael Waters talked about, referring to Dr. King. If it was preached today, and if I was to preach it, I would probably have to put it in the context of Trumpism, and I would have to reframe it why America may go to the south side of hell, uh, because it has been so much that has been done and said that is moving us so far away from Christ the center. Dietrich Bonhoeffer would talk about, and the core values of what America says we are supposed to be centered upon.
So one thing I do want to touch on in the book is kind of the way it's structured. I mentioned that, one of my author friends, Michael W. Waters, wrote one of the chapters. Another one of my author friends, Frank Thomas, wrote one of the chapters. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how you recruited folks to contribute to this?
Yeah, we started with a network of folks that we know in terms of scholarly reputation within the field. We hope to get a wide, diverse range of contributors, that is, folks that can speak to Black preaching, right? Folks that can speak to Black history. And so we put out a wide call, searching through AAR, American Academy of Religion, past conference presentations for folks that seem to have an interest in political theology. And we were grateful for the folks that said yes. I mean, because for some, and even for us, we realize that this is prophetic in and of itself, that it's dangerous waters, but we are willing to enter into this realm because we believe is right, and we believe is just and noble. And so for me to have this opportunity and for all of those that said yes, we are eternally grateful.
Indeed.
Well, you certainly recruited, strong people, those two that, that I'm, well aware of. They're incredible, powerful
Yeah.
voices.
And
And
I would add too, we wanted to get folks that can speak to Reverend Wright's ministry. We were grateful to have some insiders, such as Reverend Frank Thomas, who, has a relationship with Reverend Wright and even shares that, they have gone back and forth on sermons and polishing and editing sermons. And also Reverend Reginald Williams
yeah.
served as assistant minister in Wright's Trinity Church.
Hmm.
And so we were grateful that they're able to bring kind of an inside perspective. But many of us don't know Reverend Wright. We're speaking from a vantage point of a love for Black theology, a love for the type of ministry that Wright represents, the type of public prophetic witness that he espouses. So we were grateful. And a lot of the contributors are from different parts of the country, from Memphis, Dallas, Texas. And I love that everybody is supportive of social justice and prophetic ministry, doing the work on the ground. And I hope that the book reflects Wright's tradition and commitment to this work and gives him encouragement that your legacy lives on, not only through Trinity, but through folks around the country. And we respect that people around the world really have a deep love and admiration for Reverend Wright. And so we dedicated our book to Reverend Wright, and I'm honored and proud to be able to be one of the contributors as well as the editors alongside Dr. Johnson.
Yep. And if I can piggyback again, just the blessing we have, right, to have contributed to this volume from editorial standpoint and from actual chapter contributors. But two unique things I believe also about this book and why everyone listening needs to get your own copy of this book. You can go to bloomsbury.com. And so I'm excited about it. But the first of the two is that the book is bookend or book-ended for you English majors with a foreword by Dr. John Kinney, Dr. John W. Kinney, who is a brilliant theologian and very close friend to Reverend Wright. And in this introduction, he really sets the pace for the theological ethos of the book. He is the curator of this idea of Black theopraxis. And then the book is on the backside, bookend, by a very close and dear friend to the Wright and the Wright family, the Reverend Dr. Iva Carruthers. And Dr. Carruthers is a scholar in her own right, a brilliant, brilliant mind. And we are thankful that we were able to have both of these contributors give from their heart, and it really was, but from their scholarly mind also. You have scholars of the first caliber throughout this book. But then secondly, uh, the end of the book, before the afterword, and Iva Carruthers was very important, insistent that it was not an afterword, but an afterword, and it authentically is an afterword. But we were blessed to have a virtual conversation, interview with Reverend Wright and Jerry and a colleague. And so you have a transcript. There are aspects of Reverend Wright's ministry that he tells firsthand. It is autobiographical, but also with aspects of his life and his ministry and his journey, his heart and his compassion for the people of God at Trinity and in Chicago. So it was very much for me a subjective, objective a task in writing and in contributing, and the scholarship is seen throughout the entire edited volume.
So there's another area that's brought out in the book that I think is another one of these things that's got great historical importance, but at least a lot of white people don't know about, which is hush harbors. Could you explain that for folks that are not familiar with that term and what that meant, what that was?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a historian, I'm happy to explain it. Hush harbors are simply the secret religious meetings that African Americans conducted during the period of slavery. During slavery, it was oftentimes illegal for Blacks to have organized meetings, especially after the Nat Turner Rebellion. So to be able to have their own meetings, they had to do it in what were called the brush arbors, the thickets, the backwoods, somewhere where, the whites couldn't find them. And in these meetings, they're secret, so we don't know exactly everything that happened. But we do know that Blacks worship God in their own way. They sang their spirituals, in some cases, practice African traditions, which they were not free in many cases to practice in America. And most of all, especially as it relates to Reverend Wright, Black ministers spoke the truth. They spoke what God put on their heart, unfiltered.
Mm-hmm.
They spoke to the needs of the people in their community. And so essentially secret places for Black people to worship, to serve one another.
And even to this day, I think it has a feeling of a space to speak freely, right? That otherwise wouldn't exist in the public.
Right, right.
And there was also, from a historical standpoint, one of Dr. Wright's contemporaries was also a Unionite, go Virginia Union, the late Dr. Wyatt T. Walker, who was a brilliant, brilliant preacher, a brilliant civil rights leader, a photographer. His photography is amazing. But Dr. Walker expounded through various books on spirituals, Negro spirituals. All right. And the idea of a coded language, the language, and that one quote that these were never just songs, they were layered communication systems.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. And so I hearing songs like Steal Away, that now we sing, steal away, but it was coded messages.
Mm-hmm.
And the brilliance of these slaves who were seen as savages, who were seen as not being able to have the capacity to even have a soul, right? But yet had the brilliance of mind to create an entire coded system in song, to take the religion. And I will not use the idea of a white man's religion, right? As some have said, but to take this religion of Christianity and use the language that slave masters and slave owners would know, and the sound that they would not understand, and a hum and a rhythm that they couldn't catch up with, and to be able to sing people underground and to freedom. What an amazing experience. And yes, and it was mainly and again, Dr. Chisholm used this idea of this hush and also brush harbors, right? These hidden churches, but also that birthed and entire school systems, HBCUs, that birthed scholars and dentists and doctors, and eventually astronauts and lawyers and so on and so on. And so there was power, so much power in those secret meeting places.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I would love, if I may, Brian, to, welcome Jerry to share, if she's interested. Because what is disturbing is how Wright's messages were taken out of context, especially the viral sermon in which the snippet, "Goddamn America," is extracted from a context of a more fuller sermon in which he is speaking to folks in a specific place, right, at a particular time, right? Trinity United Church of Christ. And so, I mean, I'm just curious as to, if you want to share any thoughts about, how that was taken out of context and how it made folks at the church feel, it made the family feel at that moment in 2018 when the video surfaced.
The sermon in which I said, "Goddamn America," is entitled "Confusing God and Government."
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about biblically how people of faith put more emphasis on what the government was saying and doing than on what God was saying and doing, and comparing that to our time where we confuse the government with God and think that because the government, whatever the government says is what matters, even when it contradicts what God has been saying. That particular phrase on that particular Sunday, again, before Obama was elected to the Senate, had to do with what had happened that week. That week, George W. Bush, having us in an illegal war, searching for weapons of mass destruction, of which there still ain't found none, appears on an aircraft carrier announcing that the war is over. So what should you do? America, go shopping, say God bless America. He said that week. I responded that weekend, God bless America. No. Just as Amos and Isaiah pronounced God's condemnation on the people of faith because they were not doing God's will, and condemned them, D-A-M-N, dim, same root as damn. God damned them. You want us to say God bless America? Having come out a long trajectory of history where the government has messed over people, and you want the press to say God bless America? No, not God bless. God damn America. That was the context. And the congregation responded immediately because George W. had just said, go shopping and say God bless America.
Hmm.
Wow. I didn't realize
How
that
many
correlation.
innocent people were killed?
Yeah. Wow.
War's over. We've killed enough people from Iraq. Go shopping. What does that have to do with religion? I say God bless America while you go shopping. Just like we lost 3,000 people, human beings, on 91101. We nuked over 10,000 Japanese. And those we didn't nuke, we put it in internment camps here in the country. God bless America. Oh, now God bless America. Well, having structured the sermon to remind by rehearsing America's track record, it made preposterous the notion of saying God bless America. And the congregation was on its feet responding, egging me on. So that was the context.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like readers to take away from the book?
The book. Go buy the book. That's what you need to take away from the book. There is so much in this book that, again, sheds light to the life, legacy, the ministry of Reverend Jeremiah Wright. And even as he articulated very well just now, understanding his scholarship in context is everything. Understanding the Bible in context is everything. There's a word for that, hermeneutics, understanding what it's all about. And so I am just honored as in my chapter, I approach preaching, his preaching from this idea of pastoral prophetic preaching. That even as Reverend Wright just shared, this snippet taken out of context from a sermon, taken out of context, on a week, taken out of context, during a time of war, taken out of context, right? But he was preaching to the people of Trinity, and then from Trinity to the world. It was the heart of God that he was trying to share through the word of God. And so this book exposes and expounds on the mind, the heart, and the clarion call for justice for all people, and liberation for all those who are oppressed. Again, you can get it at bloomsbury.com. Get the book.
All right, so here it is again. It's Black Prophetic Patriotism, Reverend Jeremiah Wright Jr.'s Message, Ministry, and Legacy. And it's bloomsbury.com, bloomsbury.com. So thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate this opportunity to help set the record straight and to undo what was done many years ago, at least to the degree that we all have the ability to do that. So congratulations on the book. Congratulations on all of your work. Dr. Wright, please, thank you so much for being here and joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brian, for having us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all.